Tonight is the yahrzeit of my late father. It's I think the 8th yahrzeit, Toshin Dalet, and many of you knew him. And should be the Succos of tonight's shiur should be the Ilu Nishmosai. I'd also like to focus the Succos should also be with those of our community who are currently ill with COVID, Rahman Litzlan, even in a mild way, should be completely removed with no suffering and no symptoms. And Ani Hashem Reifecha should be a refuah shlema. Before we start the shiur, for people asking where the shiur can be heard again, so my son Yaakov Semach, who lives in New York, has made these various links. If you understand how these work, but they are available. The shiurim are recorded, and the recordings are available online in various forms, as you can see. Let's go to our first question. That is about Kedushas Uvolot. Likely or not likely. It was mentioned in passing last week. We were talking about Zekeli on the V'Omru Chulam. And by the way, I mentioned about the prompting in Uvolot. Now,
he's mentioning everybody from
certainly the minhag, the Korazel Zevi Omar, and everyone joined. The Chazan says that aloud, and everyone says together Kiddush, and so on by Baruch. So they do certainly say it aloud. The Rebbe mostly was not knowing that way, and it's not only Chabad; it's also other Chassidish kreis, and do not make such an issue of the Kedusha in Uvolot. And I mentioned last week about the Zohar. So here, this is in the Zohar. Chelik Beis Daf Kuf Chof Tes Amud Aleph, and he talks about Kedusha de Sidra. Kedusha de Sidra, that's referring to the Kedusha in Uvolot. Gedein Haigav de Dagon is now the Kadshi Yisrael Yatir Amalochi Eloi. Here is where I mentioned last week that here is an advantage that you didn't have over the Malachim. The first Kedusha we had in Birchas Krishma, we're describing what the Malachim are doing. The second Kedusha in Shemoneh was saying, we're saying together with them, and here it's Yid not doing on their own without the Malachim. And this is something which is bothering the Malachim. And when Yid is saying this Kedusha, the word Messiah can mean complete or to conceal. Begin that the Malochim should not notice and not penalize them, and should not make trouble for them. And here again, the underlined part, B'Kedush Tado V'Inon Listamoro V'Lagnozolo Beinona. This Kedusha should be concealed amongst us. Begin the Niskadish Ge Kedusha Bereisho or B'Seifo. And he mentions here also somewhere about the Loshen Arami. I don't see it right on the page right now, but that is the explanation. Let's just scroll down. Oh, this is from the Migdash Melech. Migdash Melech was, I think, from Rav Buzaglo, who has a commentary on the Zohar. The Zohar is saying that since we're saying the Kedusha, Loshen Targum, Mipnei HaMalochim, that they shouldn't be jealous of us. We're saying Kedusha each time, Yotzer and Chazos HaTfilah, and again Kedusha Sidra, but the Targum, the Aramaic, is something which they despise. Therefore, by us repeating it in Aramaic, that removes the jealousy of the Malochim and refers to where it's discussed about the idea of using Aramaic, where the Malochim don't like the Tang language of Aramaic. And this is now in Shulchan Aruch, the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch and Siman Kuf Aleph, talking about davening in various languages, and people would daven them with a malach, etc. And it says at the beginning, preferably you should daven in the Shana Kodesh, because the malachim don't understand other languages, and you need a malach to elevate your tefillah. Some daven in other languages and say that that's not a problem. Only Aramaic itself, only specifically Aramaic, which, sorry about that, because that is specifically despised the Malochim, by the Malochim, and they they push it away. Since it's the yortzeit of my father, I just want to share with you, just came to mind as I was speaking now, my father apparently, this is before my days, he was a melamed. In addition to him being a shoichet, he was a melamed. And this is a letter which he received in Tovshin Tes Zayin, Chof Aleph Ir Tovshin Tes Zayin. The letter is published in Igris, but here the Rebbe writes to him that I was pleased to read on your letter, which he had written on Yom HaBoi Hilul Rashbi. He had written a letter on Lag BaOmer on the 18th of Iyar, and the Rebbe's letter to him is dated 21st of Iyar, 3 days later. Fascinating. So anyway, the Rebbe writes to him, I'm pleased to read that you're learning with a group of children, a class of children, according to our tradition of Komet Aleph O, as known the Kedusha of the letters and of the vowels, that they are Lemoshe Misinai. And as is evident in the Zohar and the Tikkun Zohar in several places, not only the letters and the vowels themselves, but also the names of the letters, the names of the vowels. As quoted, the names of the Nekudas are Rosh Tevos of names of Malochim. So the Rebbe mentioned to my father in this letter how even the names of the Nekudas are names of Malochim. If you take Tikkun Zohar, near the beginning, he goes through the names of the Nekudas, which is a fascinating thing because the names of the Nekudas are not mentioned anywhere in Shas. Teire, comments, all of this is not mentioned anywhere in Shas, and in the Zohar there's a lot of discussion about them, and we see that it's got to do with Malochim, which are elevating. At any rate, so that comes back to our topic over here about there is some idea of suppressing the Kedusha of Lecion, not to announce it too loud, to keep the Malochim in a way that they shouldn't cause trouble. Let's move on. I don't understand too much about this, and therefore that's why I'm being mekatzer. Now, someone asked me a simple shaila. There is offered to children in schools have been offered the flu jab, and the parents have to give a consent form, sign a consent form, and they do point out it is made from, I think it's pronounced porcine gelatin. And there she's asking, the mother is asking, is that okay? And the answer is that eating is allowed to eat treifa food. That eating by definition means it goes through the throat. If it comes into the body in a different form, that's not defined as eating. What you have in front of you is from the Sefer Nishmas Avraham, which is a series of 4 or 5 volumes on Shulchan Aruch, wherever it deals with medical stuff. So here, this is in Yerideo, it talks about mechlechiks and milchiks, Simon Peites, and it talks about eating through a tube. And he says if a person's eating through a tube, which is feeding directly into the stomach, or through the nose, or PEG seems to be directly into the stomach, and he discusses, are they allowed to have meat and milk together? The bottom line, it is okay, and whether it's milk and meat or even non-kosher food, he quotes, and then this is a long part, and the end of it, he quotes the Achiezer. Achiezer is the Chuvas of Reb Chaim Oizer, who was the Rov in Vilna, very, very respected, and had a very good relationship with the Frierdiker Rebbe, actually. But he writes this, that the issur of treifa food is only when it comes through the throat. If it's not coming through the throat, it's not called eating. He quotes also the Eglei Tal, who's the Sochachover, the Avnei Nezer, again, who says it has to be a combination of going through the throat and going to the stomach, and he gives further references. So that remains the halacha, that it is allowed to have you're allowed to have these flu jabs, even though it's made from chazer. Now, in addition to what we've just said, I understand that the taste is not really it's not a pleasant taste. It doesn't come across as a food as such, and therefore even if you'd eat it, it wouldn't be an achila. So if you put it through the nose, it might come into the mouth somehow. It's not a proper food in any case. Therefore, it's not a problem as such. Now, here's an interesting, people who learn Tanya and are familiar that non-kosher animals come from sholosh klippos atmeis. So how does it work that you're getting energy from or getting some input from a chazer, which is shalosh klippos atmeis. So a horse is also shalosh klippos atmeis, and you're allowed to ride a horse. You're allowed to have benefit from a horse. You're only not allowed to eat horse flesh. You're not allowed to eat. That's shalosh klippos atmeis. But riding a horse seems to be okay. It doesn't. It seems to be klippas noiga. So the horse seems to have different aspects. Some of it is shalosh klippos atmeis, and some of it is klippas noiga. So somehow we're going to have to make a similar but more subtle difference in tray for food itself. It depends in which way it is ingested. If it's ingested in the normal way, then that is also b'derech hitzonim. It is shalosh klippos atmeis, which cannot be released to Kedusha. And if it's ingested in any other way, as we've just seen from the poskim, then it is not also b'derech hitzonim, and is a way it can be elevated. That's as much as I can tell you on this. And let's go on. One of our regular listeners, he doesn't listen live because he's somewhere in the Far East, but he listens faithfully on a weekly basis. And he asked me some shiurus about, he lives on he has a ground floor. It seems to be quite a machnis oirech. There seems to be some kind of little shul in his house also. And he has a dining room and a back room, whatever. And then there's a veranda. And he's asking about making brochos in one room and going to another part of the house, to the veranda. I told him, if you want it to be discussed on Panorama, send me some photos, which he did. Okay, so we have some photos, and if you want to, if you know some of those Far East languages, you can try to decipher the writing on top of the doorway. I wasn't able to, but it's nothing to do with him. It's from a previous user. That's there. Okay, just to give you a bit of profile where it is. So what's the issue here? The issue is that going from one place to another is a form of hefsek. Shinui mokim, going from one place to another, does create a hefsek. Now, sometimes going all right, when you go from one place to the other, we all know that you start a Shabbos meal and you're invited for Sheva brachos down the road by a neighbor, by a mishpocha. So you can go to the other place if you had that in mind. If you didn't have that in mind when you made hamotzi, and you went out and you come back, so you've got a string attached. Since you are chayav to say brocha achrona b'mkoimah, so therefore it's as if you've got a string attached, and the hefsek is not a hefsek. So there are various forms where shinui mokim does not create a hefsek. So let's see what we have over here. Okay. So here the question is, he's not going from room to room. He's actually going outdoors, and then he's going to the veranda, which you can see over here. These double doors he doesn't use. So he's going out, as you can see where the motorbike is. It's coming from the right, from outside, and then he's going to the veranda. And he's asking, when he does that, does he have to make a new brocha? If he made a brocha inside, does he have to make a new brocha when he comes to the veranda? This is his question. Now, it was just as well that he, that we're taking it this further, because I saw a fascinating Kiddush in the Sefer Piskei Teshuvos, which you have now on the screen. And he says the following. There is a shitta in poskim which says that shinui mokim, if it's under the same roof, and you had in mind when you made the bracha, you had in mind that you're going to go from one room to the other, so shinui mokim under the same roof is not a hefsek. There is that's written the way it's written in Shulchan Aruch. It's the Rav Nissim Goen. All right. The proof is from going from the house to the sukkah, within a sukkah which is within the house. So going from one room to the other, and you had that in mind, that's not a hefsek. The problem here is it's not indoors, it's outdoors. So this sefer comes along with a fascinating chiddush. Hiskimu poskes manenu, that which you say, that when you go from the house to the chotzer, from indoors to the outdoors, that shinui mokim is a hefsek. That's referring to the chotzer back in the day, where that was the route to go to the Rishus Harabim. And certainly they would share them with other people also. Therefore, going for the private to the shared area, the exposed area, that is a concept of shinei mokum, which makes a hefsek. But he says, mirpeses shalonu, our porches, or chotzer protis, or a private garden, which is surrounded with walls from all four sides, that's called like another room of the house. So let's digest what he just said here. We know that there's a concession in the concept of shinei mokum if it's under the same roof. He's taking this concession and extending it and saying, if you've got even an open air area, but because it's totally enclosed and private, therefore the din of shinei mokum is not a problem, just like mecheder lecheder. He gives several references. I looked up those references, not terribly convincing. I'm not very confident with them. Let me just throw in a variation of this question. What happens if you've got two apartments in the same house, the same building, a block of flats, going from one apartment to the other? It's under the same roof. Is that called shinei mokum? Or do you say it's on the same roof, but it's a different reshus, a different ownership b'chlal? So amongst his references, one says Ba'im is poshet. Rabbi Bashol says, he says Ba'im is poshet. It's under the same roof. It's not a hefsek. Then he brings another sefer, which says just the opposite. Ba'im is poshet, even though it's from the Rabbi Shammai Shevet HaKosi. So he says it's two separate shiurs. What's the difference on the same roof? But it's two separate shiurs. So it's not such a clear-cut thing. But he comes along with this Kiddush, which at first I was very excited to see, but when I looked up, I was a little bit disappointed. It's not such a strong thing. So if we would take on that mahalach, then if this area is all enclosed with a fence and it's a private area, then there's no problem of shinei mokum because it's all in an enclosed area. But as I say, I'm not really totally happy to rely on that. Now, we have this problem in many of our houses that we don't have a sink in the dining room. So the sink is typically in the kitchen. So what's the story? You make Kiddush, and then you put down the wine, and you go to the other room, and you wash, and then you come back. Isn't that a problem of a hefsek between Kiddush and Hamoitzi? And you have to have Kiddush b'mokum suda. So I was concerned about this, and subsequently came across this psak of the Alter Rebbe, where he says that ein shinei mokum hefsek, choshev hefsek b'suda. This concept of going out and shinei mokum being a hefsek is only if you were there for a while. Like he says, you went to shul or something, you were totally distracted. But if he says, aval im lo shor, if it wasn't a long interval, you just went there to do something briefly and you come straight back, that's not called a hefsek. And therefore, between Kiddush and Hamoitzi, it's a kind of, you're going out, coming straight back in. That should not count as a hefsek because you're coming straight back. Now, you might argue, perhaps there he's talking about you started having a drink, and now you're being interrupting between the beginning of the drink and the end of the drink. Masha'enke, you can say between Kiddush and Hamoitzi, perhaps they're not yet one unit to say that that going in and out doesn't matter. I think it should be the same thing. And in that same seif, the Alter Rebbe says the following, that when we say, let's explain something. I said before, if you made Hamoitzi and you went out, you got a string attached. And that is because you have to make Brocho achroina b'mkoimo. So therefore, you're going out is not a hefsek because you got a string attached to your back, it's pulling you back. What about if you had just something like a drink? So then it's obviously ein torn Brocho achroina b'mkoimo. Then shinei mokum is a hefsek. So now here says the Alter Rebbe another chiddush in the same place. Even tvorim she'einam tu'unim brocha la'achareyam b'mkoimo. Even something like a drink of beer. Im kova aleihem v'hin dvorim shekvi'os and kvi'os. If you sat down for a drink, a cup of coffee with someone, or even on your own, but it's a thing which to sit there, people who sit down for a cup of coffee, it's not that you're running around. It's dvorim which kvios and kvias. Then that's also he says that a hefsek arai, a brief interruption does not count as a hefsek. So that's what the Alter Rebbe says over here, which is very helpful, piece of information that going in and out just for a moment is not a hefsek. Now, coming back to our story here in the Far East, so going from one to the other, is that called a brief interlude? Oh, so one thing I would say is the following: that because it's in the veranda, it's under the same roof. So then we can go back to under the same roof. We can rely that Shinei Mokim under the same roof you had in mind. That's not a hefsek. So that's for sure. Because it's under a roof, even though it's a veranda, it's not mamish the same brickwork as a building, but it's an extension of the house. Therefore, it's not a problem of Shinei hefsek so long as you're still under the roof. Once you got into the open air, then, well, Piskei Teshuvah says it's okay. I'm not totally convinced. Then there's another issue, another heter to hold that the Shinei Mokim should not be a hefsek, and that is if roya es mekoimai. If you are in your back room and you've got a door to your garden, and you went out into your garden, but from your garden you can see where you were when you made your brocha. So it's roya es mekoimai. Roya es mekoimai is another bridge which holds that the interval should not cut through the hemshech of the brocha. So roya es mekoimai holds it prevents that it being a hefsek. We had this discussion going back at the beginning of COVID, whether roya es mekoimai through a window. So it says even through a window is also called roya es mekoimai. What if the window has got glass? So Reb Chaim Falaji, who lived in Turkey and going back 150 years ago or something, a bit earlier perhaps, Reb Chaim Falaji is convinced that a glass window is considered, is also called roya es mekoimai. I'm not totally convinced because in some contexts you'll say a glass. You may be able to see, but it's a barrier. So I'm not sure whether you can extend, because by some areas you say because you can see it, it's considered that it's in front of you. I'm not sure whether that works over here in the context of Shinei Mokim. Okay, let's move on to the next question. So that was then point 4. We kind of morphed from 3 to 4. I just want to finish off that when I was learning in Brunois, so I would sometimes go to for a Shabbos meal to Rabbi Yosef Goldberg, was Rosh Hashiva, Mishpocha, and he had a minhag that the children would bring him a bowl. He made Kiddush, and then they brought him a bowl, a Negelwasser bowl, with a kvort, and he washed next to his place. He didn't want to interrupt by going from his room, from the dining room to the kitchen, which you could not see from one to the other. So he was machmir on that. He was a very big machmir, but I don't think Halocho it's a chiyuv to be machmir so far. I'm going to now look at the chat before taking the next slide. Okay. Voor Shlema to Esther Bastoiba, freundlich, voor Shlema. The people are mentioning about the jab with the pork gelatin. They do. The Muslims are machmir on this, but you know, this is ein eitz vein tevuna. They don't have any the lomdas which Baruch Hashem we have. Someone's pointing out to me that in Igris Chelik Yudalit, page 107, where the Rebbe also says something about non-kosher ingredients in fact seeds are okay. Thank you very much for that. And now someone is writing to me that my father told me, Reb Shalom Shimon said, regarding medicine capsules with gelatin to wrap in a tissue, as there's no Hanoah's God. So there is no Hanoah's God. That's a different story. Let's deal with that for a moment. The capsules, they are made to dissolve in the stomach. Those capsules are very often made of gelatin, which is made now. There is one way of so you're worried about that. That's going through your throat. So then there might be Hanuas Goren. So Rabbi Shimon had said to wrap them in a piece of tissue and to swallow it that way. I once spoke also to Moshe Lando Shalom about this, and he said you can get something called veggie caps, which is you can take the same capsule and empty it into these veggie caps. There's capsules which are made from vegetarian sources to avoid, but that the capsules is going through the throat. Here we're talking about a nasal thing, so it's two different halachas. Okay, right. Yes, so you're asking how is kviyas defined when this Kiddush of the Alter Rebbe. So here in Siman Reish Yud Gimel, he's talking about that being moitzi someone else with birchas hanehenin. If you remember the difference, oimed or yoshev or masubin, and there are some, it's a detail there in Reish Yud Gimel, some types of foods it's a kind of more settled kind of food, which you'd have in a more settled way rather. And therefore that requires a kviyas. That's something which are snacks, which you'll eat while you're walking around. That is, you wouldn't be moitzi someone else with birchas hanehenin, but something which is like a cup of coffee, you apparently, and I'm not going to, I didn't look into it now properly, but that's the discussion. Reish Yud Gimel. The Kiddush here is, even though it doesn't require brocha achrona b'mkoim, so you haven't got that string attached, still he says, because it has a degree of kviyas, then going out for a minute is not a hefsek. Okay, just Baruch Hashem, there's lots of questions coming in. Someone's asking to, not sure what that means. How are pills still made like that? As far as I know, then most pills are not made with gelatin. What is common is that they do have lactose is quite a common ingredient. But okay, let's move on. All right, now I'm just sharing with you some of the discussions I had during the past week. This is a copy from the Sefer called Halocho and Hogi Chabad, which is a Sefer put together from all those who read the Iskashras, which has been coming out for the last 20 odd years. So the end of it has got a Luach HaShavua with halachas, etc., put together by Yossi Ginsburg, a cousin of mine who lives in Beersheba. He's a Rov in Beersheba. And they wrote the following, that when it comes to Leishev Vasukah, the one who makes Kiddush will say Leishev Vasukah right after Kiddush. And by night, it's followed by Shechionu, the first two nights. Oh, no, actually, no, the first night. The second night is Shechionu first. And by day even. And now making Kiddush by day, in Shulchan Aruch, and the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, and Daf Reish Mem Aleph says, well, by day, you shouldn't make Leishev Vasukah with the Kiddush, you should make Leishev Vasukah on the Hamoitzi. And yet the Minhag Chabad and many other circles is to say Leishev Vasukah with Kiddush. That's we know that, well known. But what was surprising to me that he writes that that's the one who makes Kiddush to say Leishev Vasukah at Kiddush. But the ones who are not making their own Kiddush, they should make Leishev Vasukah after they say Hamoitzi. So you've got a family around the table in the sukkah. So they one leads, makes Kiddush, he says Leishev Vasukah, and they then go and wash, and he gives them a piece of Hamoitzi, and they say Leishev Vasukah after Hamoitzi, before eating. I was very surprised, and I don't see any proper source for this. And you can see there's no source for this. It doesn't give a source for this thing, or that Leishev Vasukah should be said by together with Hamoitzi by those who are Yotze from Kiddush. So I wrote to Rabbi Ginsburg, asked him what's the reason for this? Where does it come from? So he said, he responded that the people who are Yotze Kiddush, they may have a little sip of the wine of Kiddush, if that, and then there's a hefsek between their Kiddush and they're going to wash and Tisha B'Yom when they come back. There's a hefsek. So I wrote back to him and said that if that's the case, even the one who makes Kiddush also has the same problem. He says he drinks little wines, a kviyas. I said, no, it doesn't have to have a revius. You can make Kiddush and have less than a revius. So why aren't you worried about him? Now, following our whole discussion which we had just now, that whole worry of going out of the room and coming back is not a worry in any case. As far as the interruption, as we just saw, just getting in and out to go and wash Tisha B'Yom, it's not called shini mokim, which is a hefsek. So really, I don't see that as justification to say that the Mesubim should make Lesha Basukah by Hamoitzi. And so just last Sunday, we had here, I asked Rabbi Ginsburg, where did he get this from? So he heard it from Rabbi Yolanda, who lives in Bnei Brak. All right, that was their minig of their family. But punctual last Sunday, Rabbi Isaac Lander, who's the current Rov of Bnei Brak, I was sitting next to him by the Bar Mitzvah, and I asked him about it. He says, Pasha, just that like many women are accustomed to make their own Brocho Hamoitzi. So the same thing, they want to make their own Lesha Basukah, not because they're not Yoitza or a Hefset, just because they want to make it. So it's quite optional. And that's what I will remain with, that for women or other family members who are Yoitza from Kiddush to make their own Lesha Basukah is optional, and whichever way you do is fine. Like the Hamoitzi, if you want to be Yoitza Hamoitzi, you can be Yoitza from the one who makes Hamoitzi, from the Balabayas. You want to make your own Hamoitzi, as you wish. Let's take a look at a couple of points which people have written in. So someone's pointing out about the nasal thing. It goes to the throat and can come back into the mouth. That's why I pointed out. Even if it does, it's a pogum. It's not a normal food, and therefore it's not a problem. Right. Let's move on. Okay. So here we have something about a bris. No. Someone's asking me to tell a story about my father, Allah Shalom. So now we're talking about the bris. So it reminds me, it was one of that was his. He was a quiet person, but this is one place where he was in the public eye, was being a moil, and he used to go. So he had once a maisa. He went to a family, Israeli couple, and after the bris, so he's holding a cup of wine. V'koresh maybe Yisrael, Nimrod. So Nimrod was a wicked person. Nimrod hayagi bochayel. He was a strong man. Okay, so he says perhaps let's give him two names. So they made a combination, Nimrod Avraham. It was an interesting combination. Several months later, he met them in the street somewhere. He met them on another occasion, and he asked them how the baby. What do they call him? They call him Avraham. Okay, there's actually someone, Balshuvik for Chabad. His name is Nimrod. He's from a non-from background, and he asked the Rebbe whether he should change his name. The Rebbe told him to keep it. So okay, fine. So you can have a Nimrod, you can be married against your Yetzirah. Okay, so now we have the question like this. Someone sends me a question the following. In the Sephardic community, they have a custom by the Bris. They say, "Shem the Torah or the mitzvahs." Why do the Sephardim have ula mitzvahs, villa mitzvahs, and we don't? So the first thing I said is simple, that we're following the Nusach HaGemara. This is the Lashon of the Brisa, that the one who makes the Bris, the Moel says Alamilo, the father says Alachnis Brisa Shel Avraham Avinu, and the people who are present answer, well, the Rebbe says they should answer Amen, don't forget to answer Amen. And then they answer Amen, Kashem Shenichnas Bris, Kachi Yikanas Torah B'Masim Tov. So the simple answer is in the Gemara. But that's a bit shallow, because the Sephardim also learn the same Gemara, and they somehow got this extra piece in. What you have on the left of your screen is from the Seder of Amram. Seder of Amram is going back perhaps 1,200 years. I'm not sure exactly. That region is one from the Gaonim, and this is the earliest Siddur which we have. And he has Kain Tachniseyu LeTorah LeChuppah or LeMitzvahs LeMasim Tovim. So you notice the difference. He has LeChuppah or LeMitzvahs, and the Sephardim today have LeMitzvahs or LeChuppah. So briefly, the Pashtus, what's going on here is the mitzvahs means the bar mitzvah. Torah is bringing to cheder to start learning Torah. The mitzvahs would be bar mitzvah. The chuppah is the chasna l'masim tovim. There were places where they would even make him a wedding. They would marry off someone before bar mitzvah. it's well known that Pila Paracha was known as the Chalamoyed because he was married off before his bar mitzvah. So he wasn't wearing tefillin and he was wearing a talus. So when do you wear a talus without tefillin on a weekday? So it's on Chalamoyed. He was known as the Chalamoyed. So the Seder of Rav Amram Goen of the Torah, the Chuppah, or the mitzvahs, the Masim Torah. But that's certainly not so common now generally, and therefore we have the Sfardish Nusach, the Torah, the mitzvahs, the Chuppah, the Masim Torah. At first it's Torah, then the mitzvahs, and then after ייכנס the Chuppah, and then Masim Torah. Why? But if they are including the mitzvahs, why does the Gemara not have it? And why does the Nusach Ashkenaz not have it? Now, I want to point out another important detail. What happened over here? The father has just said a bracha. I have a mitzvah to bring my son into the covenant of Avraham Avinu. The present company respond just like he's coming to Bris, so too you should bring him in to Torah Masim Torah. Now, if you see the nusach of the Rav Amram is kashem shehichinastoi chnisosoi kein tachniseyu, and the Sfardim also are talking in the second person kashem shehichnastoi kastis kalachnisoi. The nusach HaGemara is saying kashem shenichnos, is saying in the third person, just like this child has entered the bris, so he should enter. Why are they doing it in the third person, not giving the bracha to the father? So there are different geshoyos, and the Shach says, in Shulchan Aruch says, because sometimes there's a bris, there's no father there for whatever reason, and there you can't say kashem shehichnasta because it's not him, and therefore was changed to kashem shenichnos. And in order not to differentiate whether the father is there or not, so it became standardized to talk about in the third person kashem shenichnos. Be that as it may, but the original bracha is actually to the father. Kashem, just like you've brought him into. So now we know there's a Mishnah, a Bris, in Kiddushin, which talks about the duties of a father vis-a-vis a child. So it says a father has a duty to give the son a bris, the father has a chiyuv to teach the son Torah, and the father has a chiyuv to marry off the son. So that's a kashem shenichnasto lebris, just like you brought him to stage one. This mitzvah, you should also be zoicha. Now, when it comes to mitzvahs, what does it mean when the boy becomes? What does it mean? Hichnas to the mitzvahs. What does it mean? When the child becomes bar mitzvah, it means the child is a chiyuv. It's not the father who's bringing him into anything. At that point, the child is a chayiv b'mitzvahs, but not that the father has a chiyuv. No, on the contrary, he actually says sheptorani. What then does it mean though? Ulamasim tovim. What does it mean lamasim tovim? There's the drushim and the sikh of the Rebbe also in Tafshin Yodalad, I think, about this. But on a simple level, going back to the Bris, the father has a chiyuv to give his son a bris, to teach him Torah, also has to teach him how to swim, by the way, but that's not relevant at this moment. To teach it to marry in Ulasiya Isha, or Lamde Umnus. He has to teach his son a profession. He should be able to earn, otherwise, if a person doesn't have a profession, he becomes a crook. That says in the Gemara, he becomes a molasses zabrias. He has to have what to live on. If he doesn't have an honest income, it will be a dishonest income. So that's the lamasim tovim. So that's what kashem shenichnas or shem chichnaster. The father should be zoicha to bring his son also to establish him, give him to be able to have an honest parnos. Let's go on. Someone asked the question that what happens if people are sitting on Friday? Sounds like quite a relaxed situation. Bichlal, Friday is a time of tension. It says in the Gemara, it's a time where people are running out of Shabbos and they bash into the one or the other. Friday, it's a time it's a time of people are rushing. But it looks like these people are probably in a hotel somewhere or some guest in someone else's house, and they're sitting and chatting, or they're having a verbrengen, going into Shabbos. At what point do they have to stop this nibbling and make Kiddush? So he's asking, is the cutoff point Shkia or Nacht? So let's read here from Shulchan Aruch. So where is it in Shulchan Aruch? Reish Ayin Aleph, the beginning of Hilchos Kiddush. Osru chachomim litoim klum afilu mayim mishegiya zman hakiddush ad sheyikadosh. If you were, whatever you're doing, but you're not allowed to even have a drink of water, and certainly not to eat other foods once at the time of Kiddush until you actually make Kiddush. Once you pass Shkia and you're into what's called twilight, Ben Hashmoshes in Halocha language, at that point you're not allowed to eat further or drink further unless you make Kiddush. And if you daven Ma'ariv early, so you've made the day begin earlier, so then you'd have to stop and make Kiddush. We all know this, the concept of Paris Map and Mekadesh. That's more in the context where they had washed for a meal and they were bringing, they had a meal, and then they would stop and make Kiddush and continue with Hamoitzi, that's with Lechem Mishneh. But here I'm talking about in a more casual setting. They're sitting there for chaverim and chatting, and they're bringing. There's a bit of food at the table. As soon as it comes shkia, they're going to have to stop and make Kiddush. Now, what's the problem? If they're sitting by the table, there's plenty of mashke at the table. Why not make Kiddush on the mashke? If it wasn't enough till now, so okay, fine. So now we'll have a bit more mashke. And so the Maisis, I say that there's a difference. There's a concept of making Kiddush on Chamar Medina. Let's translate the words Chamar Medina. Chamar is the Aramaic word for wine. It's the local wine equivalent. There's not so much wine growing in that region. There is another type of drink, which is a choshev drink, and that is accepted as an alternative for wine, for Kiddush, Havdalah, etc. Now, there is actually a debate. Does it have to be alcoholic or not? Can a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, does that count for Chamar Medina? So this is a discussion in Poskim, but what I can just tell you, I remember in the Sefer Yemei Bereshis, which is a description of the first year of the Rebbe's Nesias approximately, and it has there an incident about one of the Tamimim, one of the Bochrim who was drafted to go to Japan or Korea, something, one of Vietnam, I don't remember which exactly, one of the in the Far East, and the Rebbe told him he should make Havdalah on a cup of coffee. So you have a smach that we are noyeg that you can, if necessary, make a Havdalah on a cup of coffee. Now, so of course, when we have wine, we make Kiddush on wine, both by day and by night. What happens if you don't have wine? So here, this is where it's and where it's highlighted. There's a difference between by night and by day. Let's explain. By night, you have the chalas, and by day also you have the chalas. But by night, the Kiddush is a longer Kiddush. It's a whole long Brocho. If you'll make Kiddush on a loaf of bread, on the lechem mishneh, it will sound like Kiddush because you're making the same nusach, a whole long nusach. If you do the same by day, you're going to start your meal with making what? Hamoitzim lechem in haaretz on two chalas. It doesn't sound like Kiddush. It just sounds like every day. It's not. There's no Kiddush. There's nothing unusual, like like lunch of any other day. And therefore, this is where we see the difference. If there's a shortage of wine, you don't have wine available, by night, you'd make Kiddush on the lechem. By day, you should make Kiddush on Chamar Medina. Like he says in the next line, because if you just make by day, if you make on the pass, then it won't be noticeable that this is Kiddush, because it's just a bracha bechas hanenim. But by night, he says you should make Kiddush not on the Chamar Medina. You should, because not everyone agrees with the concept of Chamar Medina, and therefore by night you should make Kiddush on the lechem. So coming back to this Fabrengen, making Kiddush on another glass of mashke is not recommended, in addition to all other reasons. But here we just see the halacha is that Chamar Medina is a solution for by day. It's not a solution for Kiddush by night. Now, then he asks another question. You see in Polish Chassidim, this is question 8 on our list. You see in Polish Chassidim making Kiddush Shabbos by day on a small shot glass, a small. So this is a well-known Polish minhag. And what they're claiming that a revi is the normal amount that you have, it's a normal amount of intake of wine. But something like alcohol, like vodka or whiskey or whatever, Shlivovitz, whatever it may be, it's not normal to have a revius of that. And what is lacking in quantity is made up with quality. So this, what you have here in front of you, is a quote from the Ketos HaShulchan, Rabbi Chaim Noah. So he gives a reference to the Sharet Tshuva, which is a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, that there are those who say that if you make Kiddush on Yash, Yash is a abbreviation of Yain Sorof, an alcohol. So he says there that you should drink a cheekful like you make, as if you made Kiddush on a wine. And also the cup for Kiddush has to contain a revius. However, B'Sefer Shut Maharsham. So who's the Marsham? Reb Shol Mordechai Kohen Shvadron. He was known as the Rov, one of the mamish, the most prominent poskim in his day. So the Rov lived about 150 years ago, perhaps a bit less. So in Galicia, I believe. So the Marsham writes from, and brings various sources, that they would make Kiddush on Shabbos morning, Shabbos day. They would make on a small cup of alcohol. Apparently, when I saw one of the sources, the Divrei Chaim, the Tzanzerov, also had this minig. A lot of the Polish Gute Yidden had this minig of making Kiddush by day on brownfin, on alcohol, and they wouldn't have a large amount; they would just have a little amount. And that's, this is a widespread Polish minig. And then Reb Chaim Noah writes, "Poshut she'ein lismech al zeh." Obviously, one shouldn't rely on this. Ela b'di'i efshli klal lekadosh al revius v'lishtes mlei lugmo. You shouldn't rely on this unless you're really not able to have a revius and drink a cheekful. So that is actually, so this business of using a shot glass for Kiddush is not followed in Lubavitch, and those who do make Kiddush and mashke for whatever reason, so they would have a Rov revius of whatever they're drinking. But there are other communities this is accepted.
Revius or Rov revius?
Right. I'm seeing here, Dov Klein, I think that is saying it's not practical. I'm going back to Leisha Basukha. Not practical to say Leisha Basukha afterwards. The family would have to have in mind not to be included in the host brocha. Some guests also don't know the brocha. Of course, the simpler thing is that they should be yotzer. And thank you for bringing me back to that. I've also got a problem that the first night, there's a seder in the Gemara which says you mesadron al hakois, leishiv vasukha and shechiyonu mesadron al hakois. So if you're going to say that that they're not going to have be yotzer from the leishiv vasukha of the Mekadesh, so they're going to have it later, yeah. So they're not going to have the shechiyonu. First of all, it's not mesadron al hakois. They're missing out on that directive of the Gemara, but also they are having the shechiyonu. Where do they have a shechion, the mitzvah of leishiv vasukha? In other words, erev Yom Tov, the ladies bench licht, if they bench licht in the sukkah even, if they said shechionu, but that's not on the mitzvah of leishiv vasukha. They made a shechionu on the chag, on the mitzvah of sitting in the sukkah. They're missing out. The leishiv of the shechionu should be following after the birchas mitzvah. So I'm not so keen. So someone's asking an unrelated question, kind of. Can you fill up a becher with water when there is already a revius, or should one fill, or shall one not have a full cup? So you're asking a question when you, for some reason, you don't have enough wine to fill the cup to the brim. What's better, to top it up with a bit of water, or should you have it not full to the brim? What I've read about I'm talking about Kedem particularly, they claim that they do not add substantial amounts of water, and therefore, if it's a regular wine, a reasonable amount of alcohol content, I don't see a problem of adding a bit of water. To add a lot of water is not okay, but a little bit of water, I think that would be correct. It would be okay. When I was in Russia in 91. And so I didn't have that much wine with me for Kiddush, etc., for Kiddush and Havdalah or whatever. And I had a big cup. So there's a simple way of topping it up. You put in a couple of cherry tomatoes into the cup, and then it fills to the top. But I didn't have cherry tomatoes. So instead, I was popping in sugar lumps. But I didn't realize until afterwards that sugar lumps don't have much bulk because they're so absorbent. They kept just dissolving and sinking to the bottom. We're just 15 sugar lumps perhaps till it reached till the top. Okay, but cherry tomatoes, or if you like the combination of some pickles inside your wine, it will work to raise the level. Okay.
Dayan Raskin, sorry, you just
Right.
mentioned.
Here is a very interesting question, and that is that there's a young man, one of our dedicated shluchim, and he goes to old age homes regularly. And before COVID, he would put on tefillin with people. And some of the people are more with it, some are less with it. But they put on tefillin with them. And if they weren't able to put on tefillin for whatever, so he would just take his yarmulke, put it on their head, and say Shema Yisrael. And that even in their state, they would sometimes be able to say with him Shema Yisrael, at least mitzvah, saying Shema, Achdas Hashem. Because of COVID, because there's this fear, the directives are is now that he mustn't have any direct contact. And they're sitting there in the old age home, sitting there bareheaded. Can he say Shema with a person who's bareheaded? Because he can't take a yarmulke. I said, take some tissues and offer them, put a tissue on their head. Or they should offer them, yeah. So that is, I think, a recommended thing. But what's the halacha? Is saying a bracha or saying Shema bareheaded, is that a mitzvah or is it a violation? So we have here, this is the Masechah Sofrim, which is printed in the back of the Gemara Vayera. It's the beginning, near the beginning. And he talks here about Moshe, a person who's bareheaded. So the first opinion says that it's okay if he would even be Payos al Shema. Yesh oimrim that if he's got torn clothes, he can be Payos al Shema. Avaloi berisha megula. He's not allowed to mention Hashem's name bareheaded. So here we have two opinions. And so now, here we have now in Shulchan Aruch, this is Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch and Siman Tzadik Aleph, where he says, he takes a stricter position that you're not allowed to mention Hashem's name bareheaded. And some say it should be moiche, but people should enter the shul bareheaded. And then Midas Chasidus, you shouldn't go bareheaded anywhere, Dal Damas, as mentioned in Siman Beis. What happened if a person did say a bracha bareheaded? Does he have to repeat the bracha? So what I see Malaktim, B'diavad, he would not have to repeat the bracha. So B'diavad, he's done a bracha. The person, let's say, was a little bit, didn't realize his yarmulke had fallen off, he's in the middle of Shemona Esrei, and then afterwards he realized. So B'diavad, he would not have to repeat the bracha. And possibly because there's opinion in this Masechah Sofrim that he is allowed to say a bracha bareheaded, so the B'diavad, that's okay. So Bob, coming back to this question, of course, try to give them a tissue to put on their head. Sleeve on the head is obviously it works. Even putting their hand on the head, if they are able to do that. But if that push comes to shove and they're totally unable even to do that, so B'diavad and B'shas Atcha can't usually kind of share the same footing. It would be a mitzvah even if they are bareheaded. I'm saying that with not so comfortable about it. I shared this on Friday night. We made a mini shiur after Ma'ariv, and I shared this discussion, and it came up in discussion what the Alter Rebbe talks about, that it's to be bareheaded is chukas hagoy. When a goy comes into a room, he removes his hat, and in English society, I believe it's quite insulting to sit inside someone's house with your hat on. You'd have to take off your hat. That's respect for the place, and so that makes it into chukas hagoy, to bear your head. But why is it chukas hagoy? Some poskim say that chukas hagoy is only when it's got a religious association. When a goy comes into the house and bears his head, is that a religious act or is it just etiquette? So here's something which you can find very interesting. In Sdei Chemed, he says the following. A goy comes into the house, he bears his head to say that when I was a baby, I had some schmutzige water spritz on my head. He had gone through a baptism. And that's why he bears his head, to remind the fact that there is a Getraya Yoshkemensch. And therefore it does have the bearing of the head is actually a religious act. That's where it comes from in the Christian culture. And for that reason, for a Yid to bear his head is an union of going bechukas hagoy. Okay, let's go on. Oh, this I got Thursday night. Someone calls me up, and last week's Sedra, if you remember, Malki Tzedek Melech Sholem, Hevi Hoitzi Lechem Vayoyin, he greets Avram after the battle, and who's Malki Tzedek? So Rashi says it's Shem ben, it's Shem, the son of Noach. So he's got now a name Malki Tzedek, and he was the king of Yerushalayim. Sholem refers to Shalayim. So in this Sefer Torah, the word Malki Tzedek, the two words, all Malki Tzedek, were written as one word. So now he's asking, what's the story? Is the Sefer Torah kosher or not? So you've got, it's a name of a person, Malki Tzedek. Now you have a name, Ben Tzion. It's Ben Tzion, it's two words, yeah. But is it one word? Is it written one word or two words? And this is a recurring question. In fact, words which are made up of two words, names made up of two words, like Kador Lo'emer. Now, Kador Lo'emer is made up of two words. Kador is like a ball. Lo'emer means like a sheaf of corn. He was, apparently, that's so in the Targum Unison, he was fat, round, like a ball. Kadur Lo'emer, like he was a bit like Mr. Roundy, if you remember him in the, was it Naughty Books? Mr. Roundy. Kol Ponim, gives to the Yankees from Vergesnish edition. Kol Ponim, so Malki Tzedek. So in the Chumash, you've got what's called Mesorah. And this is like a kind of code on the margin of the Chumash. There's a Mesorah Gdola, Mesorah Ktano, but it's very, very brief. So in the Mesorah, on the margin of the Chumash, it says, Ul Malki, Lamed stands for lesser. There's no other such word in Tanakh. V'chad, there is one else. There was once, it comes Malki. Not Ul Malki, but there is once in Tanakh, Malki. And that is in Tilim, in Kuf Daled, I think, Al Divrosi Malki Tzedek. Is it Kuf Daled? No, sorry, it's Kuf Yud. Al Divrosi Malki Tzedek. Okay. So meanwhile, we have the Mesorah says that sorry about that. The Mesorah says, "Who base milos?" It's two words. Ksiv v'nikra b'chad shita, and it should be v'nikra b'chad shita. I don't know how you read that. It means it's meant to be read on one line. Lepoil. This is what he says here. It's written as two words. Now, the master, or one of the most prominent medaktikim of the Tanakh is the Minchas Shai. So this is what you have in front of you on the middle section is for the Minchas Shai, or Malki Tzedek. So first he says, I found in one place in a Sefer Torah Muga that it was in a Shek Sefer Torah. It's been Malki Tzedek as one word. Well, Tikkun Rabbeinu Tam, however, in Rabbeinu Tam's Tikkun. So he says it's two words, and it has to be in the one line. And he says Nuschas Fardis, it's meant to be two words. And he says you have like a name Tzofnas Paneach, which is two names. It's a name for Yosef. It's made up of two words. And then he says Rameh. Rameh is Rabbi Halevi Abulefia, one of the later Rishonim. Says he brings two opinions, and he doesn't decide which one. So now. He says now, Michas Shai, I think it was Noretshi, he says what we paskin. He says, when Li Nira, we should follow the Mesorahs, that it is that's two words, because the Michas Shai says because the Mesorahs connects Malki Tzedek in Parshas Lech Lecha with Malki Tzedek in Tehillim Kuf Yud. And in Chazal, we see that Malki Tzedek in both places is associated with Shem ben Noach. It's the same person. It's called Malki Tzedek, and it's written in two words. And so just to go to the bottom of this quote, the Tilim, Tartin Milin, there's no dispute about the Malki Tzedek in Tilim as being written as two words. That would therefore reflect back to the Malki Tzedek in Parshas Lech Lecha to read it, it should be written dafka in two words. And so too, B'Sefer Yoshon, he sees Malki Tzedek it shouldn't be on two lines. When you've got a name, made up of two words, it shouldn't be made on two lines. Anyone who's writing ksubas or masada Kiddush and whatever, they have a name Shneer Zalman. So you don't write Shneer Zalman, Shneer in one line and Zalman on the next line. We look at Tchila, make a point of the two parts of the name should be on the one line. Certainly, if it's a name like Ben Sion, which some say it has to be written mamish as one word, that you mustn't divide into two lines. That would make the document possible. That is all. That's the Minchas Shai. Then we've got the Kamarna Chumash, and he writes the Kamarna lived about 150, 180 years ago. He writes,
I will go.
Malkit Tzedek Milo Chado. It's one word, and shouldn't be, there shouldn't be a gap. And certainly shouldn't be on two lines. So here you got these. Oh, sorry about that. So what remains is what I told him, that you see again. This is in Tilim, and here's the Masorah in Tilim. That's Malki said it's two words. But Ayin Minchas Shai in Parshas Lech Lecho. That there's a discussion, and Lepoil there's a sefer called Kesses HaSofer, one of the classics for him on Sofras, written by the author of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch Shlomo Gransfried. So my Tiefenbrod mentioned me this morning that he also says it should be written in two words. So therefore, the Sefer Torah should be corrected. It should be made into two words. However, until it is corrected, it looks like there is a Yeshal Milismoch to be able to continue reading. Someone's asking, when you're writing to the Rebbe, should you not break a name over two lines? Okay, that's a shaila. But when you look at Chila, when you write in a document, as in a star, it should be kept into one line. All right. As I'm repeating what was mentioned at the beginning of the shiur, that the shiur is available online in various forums, and so everyone who wants to hear a recording, so it is available. Apparently, you can search and find it that way. I wish you all a good tavoch, and we should meet in good health. Kol tov.